Alrighty, and once again we are live. Hello everyone, I hope this finds you well. I hope this finds you hopeful. Things things are really hard right now, but we keep moving forward as best we're able. And I hope that things don't have to be going perfectly, but I hope you can always look with hope for the future. With me, I'm hoping that I'm hoping I can make some good progress on artwork today, and maybe even finish some stuff. And while I do so, I have the pleasure of chatting with Aeon of Dreams.
Hello, sweeties.
Aeon, how you doing?
Oh, today I'm actually pretty good. Um, got uh, mostly just relaxed throughout most of the day. Got to talk to some people I haven't spoken to in a while. Did some more of my daily readings. A lot of mundane stuff, I admit.
Well, that's just to get you
Well,
to do some reading sounds nice.
well, as mundane as reading some probably one of the strangest books that one of the I know a grimoire is typically pretty strange for most people to read just for fun, but I found one that was even weirder that it sucked in my time because um, I remember it was a divisive book, but it's not even it's a weird book that isn't an ideology. It's like it claims to be a testimony for people born in the wrong time and for whom belong to no time or place.
Now, when you say born in the wrong time, my family says with my puns and style of humor, I was clearly meant for the 17th century. Uh, is that what they mean, or can it be something different?
Oh, it's a really strange book in this regard. I suppose it means spiritually, supernaturally. It's one of those curious books where there's usually like a dark aura around it, and I tend to read those um, a lot of the times just for fun because a part of you does naturally get curious when you're confronted with a dark book containing stuff that people allege you're not supposed to know, and then you sit there and think, okay, yeah, but what's in it? I kind of want to know.
For the forbidden fruit is that much sweeter.
Oh yeah, especially if you look for it yourself, because you usually find there is something of a point to the book, even if there's probably another drastically negative one. Like to list a less controversial one, I was reading the Satanic Bible at one point because you always get curious, like what's in it, um, and then you get to play a little wisdom game of okay, where does this have a point, and um, where does it have a point, and what does it necessarily get wrong, or what is the condition of finding out what that point is? Because it might be twisted up in something or what have you. I know I'm sounding so pretentious when I say that, but
You're doing well.
I like to think I get some forgiveness points for being self-aware. I hope.
It's all good. Also, I just want to give some shout outs to folks in the chat. I see Mad Munchkin, Sweetie Bloom, and Voice of Reason. Also, folks who are becoming returning regulars, for which I'm grateful, like the amazing Gumball, Kate and Judy Gotcha Life. Let's see, who are some other names? I'm afraid half the time I'm looking back and forth. Cotton Lum, also who claims first comment. Well done. Oh, and I am disappointed, is said, Aeon Senpai, notice me.
I'm noticing. I've got the chat thing pulled up now
Marvelous.
as my main screen if you want to focus on the drawing.
Perfect. Well, I just want to give everyone a progress report because drawing Ponyville is no small task. But I've made progress. Sweet Apple Acres is now on the map, literally. And then a particular interest was getting to draw the windmill or watermill. What is this? A granary? I don't know. My knowledge of medieval villages, but I thought a windmill would grind the grains and just be a windmill. But there's a water wheel attached here, so I don't know.
You have to admit, what's that trope called? Schizotech.
Uh,
Um,
A little bit of everything.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of everything, um, like how you can go oddly enough to a medieval castle in MLP, and then you can go into an almost exact copy of New York City in the same place. Which I mean, it makes for interesting worlds. You kind of wonder how they ended up that way, but it makes it interesting.
To be sure. Let's see. Actually, I think I have an image that might perfectly juxtapose this. This was actually a comment on on my Imani comic, which I have neglected for far too long. I have a medieval ship taking part from a modern day city, Bolston. And someone commented that perfectly summarizes the technological schizophrenia that is Equestria.
Oh, definitely. What was another good one? There was an actual real life photograph I saw on shout out to Dark Five, awesome YouTube channel. A modern U.S. Aircraft carrier came into contact with an Italian naval training ship that was based on like old sail ships, and they signaled to it, "You are the most beautiful ship I've ever seen."
I'm sorry, did the Italian ship say this or the aircraft carrier?
Oh, the U.S. aircraft carrier did. Um, to this Navy, but it's a training ship, but it's powered by sails, and it looks like it belongs in, Pirates of the Caribbean or something. It is beautiful, though.
I can only imagine. I'll have to at least look up a photo. Anywho.
Oh, it's a famous photograph by now. Well, famous in certain circles, I should say.
I'm sure for my friend Sky, I bet would have a deep appreciation. He's usually more trains and tanks, but I bet naval ships would be of interest too. So, and over here, I am working on this outcropping that overlooks Ponyville. Not seen until the introduction of Mudbriar. Darn, what was the mod couple? Yes.
Right.
And so I thought this was a nice little counterpoint to Sweet Apple Acres. But here's the fun thing. Even if I aligned all this perfectly, so this bridge and this screenshot and Town Hall all synced up, notice that they've moved, that each shot of Ponyville features a different set of buildings. If I go over and call up Equestria. Also, welcome to the Victory Fire 88. Thank you for following. So in some shots, you have the joke shop, I forget what this is, a jewelry store, and a spa or main stylist are on this side. In other shots, let's see, they're over here. And it's just generic homes on the right curve. There's Rainbow Dash. She's anything but generic. So it's always a bit of a toss-up. It's kind of funny that the layout of Ponyville shifts ever so slightly. Much like in some shots, we were talking about this just before the stream, you have Canterlot off in the distance and a Purple Mountain's Majesty. But in other episodes, no mountain ranges to be seen. It is wide open. And Aeon, you had a very good observation on that.
Yeah, no, you can almost date when. Sorry, let me organize that. You can almost date when the picture or image of Ponyville was made based on how old it is, because if it's old, then Canterlot is in the background, which, I mean, that works for like the theme song and like promotional stuff, but for a lot of the villain specials, it makes for a lot more dramatic tension for Canterlot to be somewhere over the horizon, off over. Sorry, my roommate's washing stuff.
That's all right.
He should be done quickly.
Don't worry.
Yeah, it makes less dramatic tension, because if there's a villainous plot ravaging Canterlot, like say when King Sombra came back, you could have easily just had situations where it's like, oh, it's over there, and then they could get to it relatively quicker. So instead of Sombra having conquered all of Canterlot and raising the dramatic tension, it would have just been, oh, we caught him in the middle of it.
Sombra,
Or something similar.
I thought you would have made more progress. I'm having an off day.
I need a stupid day.
Don't we all?
Oh, I agree. Was it? No, that was a Nostalgia Critic's review of Devil when they were criticizing the motivation of the like why some people were in the elevator and some weren't. Like how was it? Some of these so-called sinners were there for pretty minor reasons.
Also, quick shout out to Evelyn RK50. Thank you for following. But yeah, I saw the Nostalgia Critics review of Devil, and okay, Rita Repulsa trapped in an elevator is fun on its own. But yes, everyone needs a stupid day, even the Prince of Darkness.
I mean, yeah, I would argue though that it fit his character. It fits his character really well because if your weakness is supposed to be vanity, then you're gonna be making all these little mistakes and things like that not because it's like, oh well, you could have won if you tried. It's like, well, no, he did try. That for vanity to be a real problem, you can't have this whole, oh well, he's always having his hands tied behind his back, because we wouldn't say that for any other character flaw. For vanity to really be a flaw, it has to cost you something.
Kind of like Chrysalis, who often sabotages herself.
Yeah. Or like my favorite example from anime is those who watch the Fate series is Gilgamesh, where he considers it to be an insult if he actually has to put effort into fighting you. So at critical moments, he might lose a fight because he didn't, and the writer even confirmed that if he did, he could end the conflict of the series within a single day.
But then he'd take that as an affront.
Yeah, it's an affront to both his honor and his character, because the way he sees it, he's the most powerful hero character in the series. So as far as he's concerned, unless he has judged you worthy of going full out on, then he will never go full out on you. Because that is an insult to his own ego if he has to put effort into you.
And that's interesting. I often in the critique of a lot of shows, people will say, well, if the villain were smart, or if I were the villain, I would do this. And it's like the whole point of a villain, not a tragic character, but a villain, is that they are not mentally or emotionally balanced. They are not viewing or acting with a clear mind. Their flaws are actually far too much in the driver's seat. So you're right. Maybe you would have done that. But are you a villain? No.
Well, definitely not. And you also don't have the villain's power because, let's bring up Gilgamesh again. The reason he has all that vanity is because he really is the most powerful hero. And oftentimes, even when he isn't trying, there are a lot of times where he'll still win a lot of fights. Like, there was one time, it was a really heartbreaking battle, although it was also pretty brutal, where he defeats Hercules. And he still did it with no effort, even if he got surprised on a couple occasions. But that's also meant to establish that. Sorry, that you can hear that.
It's all
he
good.
He should be done soon. But it's also meant to establish that there's a reason he has this vanity. Because like if a series is written really well, if a villain has vanity, it'll still illustrate reasons why he has that vanity, such as say killing Hercules 12 times, for instance. Also, someone asked me a question. Hold on, isn't stupidity considered a sin in the satanic religion? It is. As a small side note before I go back, The Satanic Bible is a fun book, but it's really, by its own admission, it's atheism with a floor show. And one of its more fatal errors is it doesn't actually give you any impetus for self improvement. Like, it's great for like self love and like figuring yourself out. However, unless you're someone who naturally is inclined to self-improvement, it can cause you to just be a little too complacent with your problems, I've noticed. And so a lot of memes have been made about that.
I think we should clarify when you say a satanic Bible, we're not talking demon worship in what people would think. Oh, you're going to sacrifice another person. This is more using Satan as a symbol of resistance to organized religion.
Kind of. This is what we call LaVeyan Satanism because of Anton LaVey. It was essentially just, in his own words, atheism with the floor show. And he defines his reasoning really, really well. And if you really want to view it as like a stepping stone, it is a really good, it's actually a really good self-help book for your self-esteem. It's just, there are parts to it that I would argue probably don't work the best in practice. Namely that you usually tend to only meet like two types of them. You tend to meet like the fun ones, as I say, or you'll meet others who really don't take any care of themselves. That they've let themselves go. They don't really do much of anything, and they more or less use the Satanic Bible as just an excuse because there's nothing in it to drive you to self-improvement outside of whether or not you were a self-improvement person anyway. But if you want to call it anything, I viewed it as art because it was a perfect parody of the Catholic Church up until there was a real-life Darth Plagueis moment with it in 1993, which destroyed it.
Well, I worry about going too far on that right now. It's a turbulent time.
Oh, of course. Sorry about that.
I just want to have people have fun. It's worthy of discussion, but discussions are like battles. You gotta pick them.
Oh yeah, no. I do know that I'm walking on a few eggshells by bringing that particular one up.
No worries. I asked a question. You answered.
Fair enough.
But speaking of questions,
it was supposed.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, sorry. I don't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, you go ahead.
Well, I just want to mention.
Oh no, I wasn't gonna. I don't think it was.
I saw some folks in the chat asking about TF2, but I don't want to give anything away for what's upcoming because folks are working hard to get these videos ready for the fandom to see, and it would be a huge disservice to them to even hint that Silver-Quill is an alien. Whoops. And that's
I remember being shown that.
And that's what we call a troll spoiler.
Right. No, I know stuff too, just because I happen to live with one of the editors, or I live with Lightning Bliss, so naturally I'm gonna see and watch some of the early previews, but I don't spill anything.
The question also arose: why do I ship Lightning Bliss with? Used to ship Lightning Bliss with Flash Sentry. That joke has run its course and is now been let go. But once upon a time, Lightning Bliss was having an interview with Vincent Tong, voice actor of Flash Sentry, and he made several jokes, mock flirting. And then about, I think almost a year later at BabsCon, we were playing a game of Prance, and I managed to slap on the deck, which contained both Lightning Bliss's card and Flash Sentry. And I joked to everyone, I'm going to ship her with Flash Sentry, toward a little fake mustache as I did so. And that led to her delightful revenge videos, and so I kept the feud going in a loving but trollish manner. But all jokes need to know when to exit the stage, and that one had run its course. There are other ways to provoke revenge videos from her. I'm confident I shall find more.
Mm-hmm. Also, hello, sweetie. Bloom. I got into the habit of calling people sweetie a lot now. which probably confuses a lot of people. Um, no, there was that actually reminded me. Speaking of stories involving voice actors, there was a funny backstory to how we got the voice actress for Euphoria because her voice actress was actually a professional, and some people may already know this story. Her name is Rena Chan, and she's been in mostly anime. Uh, she does a lot of English dubs for anime and Funimation. I think it's Funimation. I could be completely wrong about that. But she's also been in a few video games, like if anyone's played Nier Automata. Um, and as it turned out, we had initially given the role of Euphoria to uh, DeWolfstonator's wife, Katie, but she felt she couldn't really do the role justice and said, "Oh, hey, wait, I got a roommate. I think she can do it pretty well." She brought over the lines, and it all looks good. Bliss decides to hear the roommate. She hears her, and it's really good. And she mentioned it was Rena Chan, where I remembered her from the earlier days of the fandom. If anyone remembers the song "Lost on the Moon," uh, with her on the vocals and wooden toasters instrumentals, that'll send you back to 2012 real quick. Um, and so we hired. So she was brought on to do the roles, and Bliss said, "Oh, what do you want as payment?" And she's like, "Oh, I want a mocha. Could you just send me like $5 in PayPal?" And what she didn't know, and she only found out after we told our friends about it, was she had accidentally hired a professional voice actress.
Accidentally. Well done.
Yes, accidentally.
I'm feeling it, Bob Ross. We don't make mistakes, just happy accidents.
Sentinel Railguard. When did I first get into the occult? 2013. I would have gone on. I was actually in Salem, Massachusetts, and that's when I decided to buy some books because I was getting curious about it. And oh right, I had another analyst that I know because I mentioned the original philosopher analyst that got me into analysis is no longer around. Well, I got another friend who also isn't around in the fandom anymore and erased his channel, who got me into that stuff too. He was a Kemetic, or rather Egyptian witch who who told me a lot of the basics and showed me a lot of things. Answer that question.
This is sort of the funny thing with layering. I see this tree that the three ponies are sitting upon. It's like, how is this blending? Oh, I am grow always more appreciative of how the staff created these deceptively simple landscapes.
It changes with time because, as you might imagine, working on something for a decade, you learn how to do more dynamic things, and we probably all noticed it in the facial expressions of all the ponies, especially all the meme faces. But in the environment, you can see more subtle things. Like, I don't know, I could be wrong, but it looked to me like as time went on, the environment started to get a lot more gradients,
more texturing too.
Yeah, and it's almost like when you play that map, you can almost see if you were to arrange it in such a way, especially with Canterlot in the background, you see it go from simplistic to gradually fanning out into something more complicated.
Yes. Yes, if I could go back and tap myself on the shoulder, I'd say, hey, expand and resize those screenshots to make a map rather than have all this piecemeal brouhaha. But that's something else I've learned.
If I don't get too philosophical, there's an interesting little thing about that where it seems like Ponyville isn't a concrete thing. Ponyville is a relatively agreed upon thing, and we don't know it by its exact layout. We know it by its general essence or character. Damn, I'm really pretentious this stream. Holy crap.
That's not pretentious. That's the truth. We do. Look, I say Ponyville, everyone has sort of an image in their head. But maybe you think of like Sugar Cube Corner first, or Rarity's Boutique, or Town Hall. It all. I mean, you mention anything, and something that's more important or relevant to you will pop into memory first, and the map sort of builds out from there.
Yeah, no, what was that called? I believe it's more like it's not something concrete. It's something that just has an essence, and it's weird that a lot of the times, like if you go even further with these examples, you may not always be able to define like what it is, but you can tell but you can also tell when people get it wrong. Like to give you an example, when they were going to replace I know I'm coming off as a car guy now, but the Ford Mustang with the probe, because that was going to be its replacement. Ford got so much backlash because they said there's a rough idea that everyone has of what a Mustang should be, and they can't really define exactly everything it is. They just know that the Ford probe wasn't it.
Hmm.
But if you look at, like, say, a Fox body or a classic one or even one of the more modern ones, you can always tell that it fits the essence or character of what we define as, I don't know, the platonic form of what a Ford Mustang should be.
I think that's true of many a fandom. We don't always know what we want, but we know when something isn't living up. What's that old saying?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't have to be a chef to know I've eaten a bad meal. I agree with that, but at the same time, if you want to articulate why it's a bad meal, it helps if you know how to speak the chef's lingo.
Yeah, exactly. Or I don't need a doctor to tell me if my arm is broken. If it's bending the wrong way, I get the feeling something's probably wrong. But someone actually asked us a question. If you could live in a cartoon world aside from MLP, which one would it be?
Cartoon world. What would... Unfortunately, a lot of the cartoon or animated worlds I watched were always under attack by something.
Yeah, right. Like I thought I had an answer, even though I did admit, like, I'm not sure how much I would like seriously want to. So I suppose I could just say I liked Gravity Falls because that was a really fleshed out world. And I suppose if you don't want to have any of the weirdness, you can just not live in Gravity Falls.
I think One Piece and the Grand Line. If we're gonna go with something exciting outside the ordinary, One Piece always throws something new at you, and it's extraordinary.
Oh, anime. Okay. If we're including anime, I might change my answer.
I kind of have to on account of the fact that I haven't seen a lot of the modern day cartoons. So
Oh.
I'm behind.
I recommend, with full bias, Gravity Falls is probably my favorite non-MLP piece of animation. I'd recommend Steven Universe too, even if just to stay relevant to conversation. Oh, hey, Laura. I didn't expect you to be here.
I saw a question if I could.
And also, hi, Blissy.
Ah, yes. Blissy Bliss. Oh, wait, is Blissy Bliss in the chat?
Oh, yeah, she is. Blissy Boo is here.
Hello, Blissy Boo.
Blissy Boo.
Yay.
Ancient Magus Bride, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yes, hello to you too. Hello to you too, Laura. Love you too.
Blissy told me about the Ancient Magus Bride after we enjoyed Winnie City. I think it was in... No, it was 2019. The con had ended. I was waiting to say goodbye to some friends, and we were just chatting things up in the lobby. It sounded fascinating, but I haven't made good on watching it. Sorry, Bliss.
Oh, what's another one? Like, the new stuff is like the new animation is pretty good though. Like I haven't seen Adventure Time, I admit. I've seen some of Steven Universe. I saw the end of Steven Universe Future, but to me, I always liked probably Gravity Falls the best out of them all because it's imagine those TV shows like Supernatural and like Twin Peaks, but now imagine it's like a fun, almost kind of silly, kid-friendly version of it. And there's something like really charming about it. But It ties in the overarching narratives extremely well because even when it feels like it's doing filler, it's not really doing filler because the entire point is, oh, there's a mystery to this town and everything you see revolves around the town or how the town works or like even things that you may not have thought about immediately. There's an episode usually that answers what skeptical questions you might have in a very creative and occasionally pretty silly way, but it can also break up its tension really well. Like if it is serious, it knows exactly when to break it with a joke.
Yes, I haven't seen either, but I had the pleasure of watching a few SF Debris reviews, and it looked like a lot of fun. And I just have to make the time to watch it. Never an easy task.
Oh yeah, especially not with all the busyness of today.
Oh goodness. Yes.
But if we include anime into this discussion of where we might live, I suppose Your Name, because that's probably my favorite movie.
Oh, I love Your Name.
Okay. Shinkai in general, I've only seen one of his other movies, and that was 5 centimeters per second. But he's definitely a director for whom you can tell what he's about just by watching like a few of his movies. Because some directors they might have like a theme or something consistently present in everything. Like who's the director who did if you happen to know Black Swan?
Oh yes, I saw Black. I couldn't get into Black Swan as much as everyone else. Mostly, I guess because I just wasn't in the mood for something dark.
Well, that director, funny enough, a consistent theme throughout his movies, with Shinkai, it's always like young love.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of his movies relate to that in some way. With the director of Black Swan, I saw this on like Stories of Old when he talked about The Fountain, where he mentions this particular director has a habit of having all of his protagonists having an obsession that is usually very like it gets them somewhere, but it also kind of ruins them.
Oh,
and that's usually present in almost all of his movies.
A tragic hero aspect?
Bless you.
Bless you, Blissy.
If you heard... Oh, Silver-Quill says bless you too, and I think most of the stream will too.
Even her sneezes are adorable.
Oh yeah, it sounds like a kitten.
Oh no!
Yes, I have my next art piece, Blissy Kitten. Kitten Bliss.
Oh my god! No, I was making a joke about that earlier today.
Really? We're on the same wavelength then.
Oh yeah, no, totally. We are totally vibing with each other right now.
Yes.
She's shooting me a look, and let's just say me and you should both be very proud of that.
Yes, I think I just prompted another revenge video. Or I will. Watch for that, everyone, please. Oh no. Sweetie Bloom is typing in me in all caps. Watch Avatar The Last Airbender! She will.
Oh, yeah, that was another good one.
Avatar sounds fascinating. I mean, although it's also curious to see Legend of Korra continue the world and how it's changed. I know a little bit of the backstory of how the city where Korra lives for a good chunk, how it came into being. And it's an interesting dilemma.
It's an interesting dilemma. It's an interesting show, but I noticed that it's a really divisive show. There's some people who were totally A-okay with Korra, especially when when it first came out, there was lots and lots of hype for it. However, as time went on, some people were picking at some other parts. I did like that there is one of those comedy episodes where it does charmingly poke fun at itself. But whether or not it got you to think deeper about the deeper stuff that it pointed out is completely up to you. I'm sort of the attitude that probably the original Avatar was better, but that's really not a dangerous opinion. Also, someone asked a question. What is your favorite villain?
Oh, oh, so many. There's so many good villains, and I use that term with full sense of the irony. What was it?
Right, right.
Batman, Superman, Public Enemies. Superman asks, "Why do the good villains never stay dead?" And Batman asks Clark, What are good villains?"
uh, hmm. Well, what's interesting is that my favorite villain might, whether or not my favorite villain is actually a villain is debatable, so I'll just call him an antagonist because that's a lot more accurate. I recently got done showing Blissey this a day or two ago, but it's probably Shogo Makishima from Psycho Pass.
I've seen. I'm always good at seeing clips of stuff. He's a guy who directly challenged the heroine's resolve, rather.
Yes, and no, I love this. I love the symbolism of that scene. That is one of the most brilliant scenes in the anime, where she's meant to be the civil system's ideal person, so to speak, but she's also been living under its rules so much that she can't, like everyone else, she can't think for herself. She is the public at large who supports it, but transformative enough to want to serve it and change it. So similar to the whole, like, oh, if this person tried, this would have ended, like when she has the shotgun, it's more like, no, she physically never would have been able to fire that shotgun because she has been raised in the system, and that's part of who she is. So because the system isn't making the decision for her, she was never able to kill him even with a loaded shotgun. And he knows that, and that's probably one of the biggest flexes in all of it I've ever seen a villain do.
For me, oddly enough, I'm coming down to Megabyte of Reboot. Not the Guardian Code. I haven't seen that and will not go out of my way to do so. But the original Reboot, Megabyte was this villain who, in some ways, he could be so charming and could actually be fun. There's one episode where a character has a birthday and his vast network of spies uncover it. And all he does is come in and hold a wicked rock guitar solo before walking out. But just a few episodes later, he does a bit of treachery that changes the tone of the whole series in a believable way. And just like, wow, no, you're kind of mad at yourself for having liked this guy, seeing what he now does. And then his final fight with Matrix. It's funny, it's not a hugely choreographed one, but there is so much weight to it, both emotional and just feeling the impact of the blows. He's a great villain,
Right.
For challenging the former Enzo and his growth and who he is. So I think we both tend to agree that a villain who challenges your preconceptions is more fun than even the "haha, I'm going to conquer the world" type.
Yeah, like what I loved about Pull Back to Mind Makishima, he at first it seems like all he wants to do is destroy like the system that they're in, but in reality he just has fun playing the game of you might say playing the game of just existing, so to speak. But he wants that existence to have a value or a meaning, and he thinks that like, oh, everyone's actions are controlled, then you're not really making any decisions, and you might say your soul is unutilized.
Ooh.
If your soul is unutilized, then how does your life have value?
Ooh.
And in scary ways, the series does show that on many occasions he has a point, even if you disagree with his methodology. But his conversations with these psychologically, you might say, psychologically messed up people are probably some of the most interesting conversations you'll hear, because he has dialogues with, he kind of dialogues with all of them and asks them curious questions about their obsessions and how the system itself caused them to become who they are, and he's just kind of enabling them. But he doesn't have any patience if you fail. If the cops catch you, then he will be he's disappointed. But if he's one of those, if I give you the freedom to stand, but the freedom to fall as well, and I won't get in the middle of that.
Which makes a odd kind of sense. Doesn't he also have a speech about why he wants to read a physical book rather than a digital download?
Yes, that is also one of the more classic scenes because it's literally just the author saying, "Hey, you should totally read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," and then compare it to Blade Runner later. That was the point of the conversation. But he does. He likes things that have character, and later on, you finally do get to hear something about his own motivations, and he mentions he doesn't like to live in a world where everyone is alone and no one has any value, and anything can be any person, piece of information, or anything can be replaced with a search and a click. So he likes things that have character.
Again,
But he falls into that. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
sounds like again he's tapping into why we have certain favorite villains. They have character.
Yeah, and then he's kind of like that villain that you like in a very dark way. Like he's telling you dark things, but not necessarily that some of them are true or not. Like you can disagree with his methodology, but you can't deny he looks really cool and very intelligent when he does it. That doesn't mean to necessarily follow his example, but I like that he can legitimately make you think about it. Like what was another famous lecture that he gave? Like that entire confrontation where Akane has the shotgun and he mentions, well, this is an interesting conversation. Let's define criminal. Because in that society, it's all done by the system, and the system can't judge or detect him. So he's got that's his story-breaking superpower is that he's so mentally abnormal that the system can't register him. So it keeps registering him as a perfect citizen. And because of that, he's able to do it's a really dramatic scene where he essentially has the main character's best friend, and he's casually swishing her with a knife. And she keeps pointing the gun at him that detects his scan and says, "Oh, crime coefficient 50, enforcement action isn't required, the trigger is locked." It's and she can tell he's doing something wrong, but he's like, "Oh, you mean because I'm a good, upstanding citizen? Because that's what Trustee Sybil has just told you."
And this ties in. We had the chance to talk about the foil.
Yes, he's the perfect adversary, I would say.
A challenge to the system itself.
Yeah, and he's the perfect counter because the system itself can't even judge him, and the system's judgment is required to actually do anything to him. And his history backs up everything, and so whereas all you might say the killers that he facilitates they're not quite adversaries. Because they still end up being caught by the system. Some of them get a little bit closer than others. But he's the true adversary. He's the one where every little circumstance just hits exactly perfectly. And he incenses everyone else who feels that they have problems with the system to rebel against that system. And in a way that the series makes it, believable. At least in the sense that people would realistically be angry at this, or other people would take issue with that, and maybe be incensed to it. And so the series, what I really like about it is that it never doubts your intelligence. Everyone's perspective is just a perspective, and everyone is wrong about one thing or another, typically. So all you're given are a series of perspectives for which you're allowed to make your own thoughts about. So, when the villain talks about one of the characters or his opinion of art, all you're really given are two opinions on art. The series isn't going to enforce one over the other all that much.
You're making me want to watch this series.
So when the villain says something, and then maybe Akane says something, or Kogami says something, it's not necessarily the series is demanding that you see it that way. The series is only saying, "Oh, this is what Kogami thinks."
That sounds a bit like the villain from Star Trek Into Darkness. No, not Into Darkness. What was the most recent Star Trek movie? gosh,
Was it the one with Khan, where Benedict Cumberbatch was Khan?
no, that was I think that was Into Darkness. This one was The Final Frontier. No, dang it, I'm gonna have to look this up. But basically, the villain has a legitimate anger with Starfleet. I guess the problem is that he doesn't incense anyone else, but he stands in opposition to the unity that a lot of the crew advocates. So
Yeah,
he's,
and that's
but he's not a perfect nemesis in that sense because it's just him, really.
right. And you can have stuff like that too, and sometimes that's the case of like the tragic villain in the original sense of tragedy, where the tragic villain isn't may not even necessarily be deceived in any way. It could be you understand why they have to do what they must do, even if it is fated that they must end tragically, so to speak. And that goes all the way back to old mythology. Like it doesn't matter how many times you reread Gilgamesh. Well, I know Gilgamesh isn't a villain. He's the first hero of humanity, or at least recorded hero of humanity, I should say. But it doesn't matter how many times you reread the story, he will never get. The plant of immortality will always be eaten by the snake, and Enkidu is always killed by Enlil.
I've gotten to read that, and it's probably my favorite, even more than Beowulf.
That ending grips you,
Mm.
at least in mine. I can't put my finger on why, but it triggers a catharsis. It triggers a moment of catharsis, and it feels like it's something that reaches far beyond time. And even when translated it from its original language into English, it really, I can only imagine what it must have felt to have been able to read it in Sumerian back then, but it still has a massive psychological punch, even in English.
Just as a quick aside, I want to thank Sweetie Bloom, Trinary, and the Blue Griffin, who corrected me. It's Star Trek Beyond I was talking about.
Oh, cool.
And I especially love that while I'm working, I get a text, Beyond. I don't think that's perfect.
Excuse me.
I have
Yeah, that is perfect.
I have on-demand fact check.
Oh, Equestria guy's asking a question. Have you and Aeon ever had a lucid dream before?
I had one, but I didn't do much with it. I simply somehow my mind clicked. Wait, this doesn't make sense. This is a dream. Wake up, and next thing I knew, I've never really been able to control my dreams.
I used to be able to. I had weird relationships with dreams because of like the most weird thing I've had recently was when I was and I don't mind mentioning this. I was in a crisis unit, which is kind of like a temporary mental asylum for something, and I noticed in a lot of those mental states, I would get extremely vivid dreams that would weirdly impact my emotional state, and a lot of what people might call astral projection, where on particularly bad days, I would like go to bed in my assigned room, and then I would like have like really vivid projections of the room while I was like sleeping. It's really hard to describe, but it felt like it was a layer removed from everything normally. That's Silver-Quill at Aeon of Dreams. What do you think of the trope complete monster? It comes off as lazy to me. But I do admit, like, if there's a villain that's just a complete monster, I do tend to be a bit turned off.
To have a character be a complete monster, and I admit I don't know the full scope of the trope, I need to know why they became a monster. Case in point, Joker. Recently, the live-action movie that really no one was sure how it would turn out. You know, can you do a movie about the Joker? Well, yes, you can, and it's widely celebrated. And yet, a big part of that is that you suddenly understand why he is a monster, but he's the monster society created. And in some ways, he is the ultimate judgment and criticism of well, society.
Yeah, or like that Makishima guy I brought up earlier. Uh, Again, the perfect like I view an adversary as being different from a complete monster because in the character of an adversary, it usually requires that you break down how and why this person became the adversary, or why he is the perfect answer to the system. Either he's the perfect counter to it, or he's like a representation of everything that is wrong with it. And sometimes that doesn't even need to be a person. Sometimes it could be an event, like HBO's Chernobyl. Like the event of Chernobyl itself is the adversary. Though you might argue that Legasov in the show and in real life is probably what I would call an adversarial hero. Because he does get the job done. He does solve Chernobyl, but in doing so, it exposed and then later destroyed the Soviet Union.
Let's get this shifted over just a little. Again,
it's a good show, but don't watch. I'm only going to say this: don't watch if you're too young. It is a very, very dark show.
It is.
It is historic, though.
I've heard descriptions, and yes, it will. It will give nightmares. I myself am like, right now I'm not in a place where I think I would appreciate it, but probably now's not the best time.
Yeah, I think my mom described it because I saw it with her recently as it's kind of like Schindler's List. It's dark, it's fascinating, you should totally watch it, but she also admitted she would never really want to watch it any more than once. Got a couple. First off, Ryan MCC, thank you. I will gladly be anyone's spirit animal if they so wish to have me as that. Okay, here's one for us. What about the homunculus known as Father from Full Metal Alchemist?
Just one? I think recall several.
Oh, no, the one known as Father.
Ah.
I just viewed him as materialistic scientific ambition, where instead of trying to integrate himself, he tried to just get rid of everything he didn't like, and it led to a problem. And it does culminate into a pretty epic scene where he confronts, truth. And those of you who've seen the anime will know who I'm talking about. And they have an interesting, intimate conversation when he asks, "How did I fail? What did I do wrong?"
What was the answer, if I may ask? Or does he get an answer?
I remember he got an answer. I don't quite remember exactly everything that it was. I just remember that it was a poignant and very sticking answer. But it had something to do with the fact that he broke himself off. He broke all of his sins off and then claimed superiority over man by making himself effectively in spirit less than human while claiming material superiority, which breaks a lesser-known law of alchemy, which says your spiritual, mental, and physical development must match. And what Father did is that he over-specialized in just material progress, and then tried to claim superiority out of it.
Yeah, that reminds me. I saw the original Full Metal Alchemist anime more than Brotherhood, but I remember the three-legged chair that looked like it wouldn't balance at all. But alchemy is the science of balance.
Nope. Yeah, equivalent exchange. Yeah, equivalent exchange, which has a lot of deeper meaning when you think about it. But I do like that FMA does touch on that and how even though it takes the entire series, Elric learns that wasn't just meant to be a physical scientific principle. That was also meant to be a general mysterious life principle, even for the things he doesn't quite know about. And he learns to think dynamically because of that, and that's why he, at the end of Brotherhood, he actually gets, when he's confronted with something similar to that, he gets it correct. Because it took him long enough. It took him the entire series, but he finally understood what that really meant.
Well, often actually, that ties into a question I saw in the chat earlier. What makes a hero? What do you? Yes, Sentinel Royal Guard. What do you think makes a hero in fiction?
Right. Okay. Ooh, I can get real deep about this one.
Please do.
um, hmm. But I don't. I actually don't think it's necessarily tied to morality. Um, I think I usually think of what a hero is someone who represents something deep about human nature or desire. Human nature, desire, or sympathies, something that usually has to do with like deep meaning, even if it doesn't appear by our modern sensibilities um, that this person would necessarily be moral.
Gilgamesh.
Like for instance, yeah, Gilgamesh. That's a brilliant example. He does many things we would not consider heroic. Sigurd the Volsung, who was like sort of like the premier Viking hero, who later became Siegfried the Knight. Um, he what is it? He also does a lot of things that you might not consider heroic, but I think uh, and Ryan, we're gonna get it. I'm gonna go into that in a moment. It's and it's sort of like they sort of show you the way about something, but they used to always have this balance of they'll still fight for what they see as the good, but they will also illustrate the evil that appears as good and the good that appears as evil, which is where things get a little bit dicier. Like let's use a biblical example. When Jesus and Satan are having a conversation, he does say a lot of things which a lot of modern heroes might necessarily agree with. Like for instance, what is it? When he says, "Why don't you end all hunger by turning this stone into bread?" I think was one of the examples. And the point of the hero was to illustrate how one gets through life, whereas you might say as the satanic ego might say, well, why can't life just be all hedonism? Why not use your divine power to just turn the stone into bread and just make it all that? Well, because the point of the hero was actually not to pull you into any kind of fantasy back then. The point of the hero was to show you how to go through life with dignity. So, and oftentimes that dignity meant maybe you didn't do something that by modern standards we'd consider necessarily heroic, but it was a way that you could live, and it was typically a wise response in a complicated world. And it usually also tapped deep into human desires and potentials and treated them realistically. So to me, that's what it is. But to go into Ryan's question of are heroes and villains cut from the same cloth, and I remember we touched upon this at HarmonyCon. I argue that they are because, at least with the hero and the adversary, and to a point, the villain is the real point that a lot of villains make, because I know this is a tired trope now of we're not so different, you and I. If you really want to know what they're actually trying to do properly, it's that the hero and the villain really aren't any different. They're both transformative figures reacting or causing the change in the world. It's just the only difference between them, the only real difference is a fundamental answer to one question, and that's if you say, does the suffering inherent within being or life justify it? And if you're the hero, you say, yes, it is, and you seek to ensure that it can continue. But if you're the villain or the adversary, the answer is no, and that the game should end. The game should end. Like, existence isn't worth it, and the game must end. And that's really the only real difference. And that creates a lot of dynamic ideas, but it also meant that in the old days, your hero character might have done something that we wouldn't consider heroic now because, again, it was less about... I suppose back then this would have been morality, but in modern days it was less, I'm going to uphold the value of justice, however you wish to define it, and Boy Scout behavior. It was always way more complicated back then. So With Sigurd, he wins battles and conquers things and does these things, but he also lays out a spiritual path for initiates as to how to get through life and what would have been the harsh, wintry Viking landscape of the north. And that worked for the Vikings, such as, just like how Horus worked for the Egyptians. And who's the Roman hero?
Roman heroes.
Or
Romulus and Remus?
yeah, or like how those two worked for Rome. They represented what they saw as the virtues of Rome, and the virtue was that you got to go through and have a meaningful life, or even a life as an initiator. It showed you a way through it in the face of all these drastic problems, which were usually metaphors for something. Sigurd fighting Fafnir the dragon Fafnir was a dragon turned into such because he was corrupted by greed and murdered his family. Sigurd faces the corruption of what is now a dragon, or another a monster that would threaten both his well-being and society, because he's, even despite all the other stuff, he's still the hero, and you will still confront that in the world, is the greed inherent within man, or the greed for one's own ego, represented by the cursed ring. The ring made of gold, that which was never yours and was never meant to be yours.
And that's carried through into the Lord of the Rings.
Yep, that is the direct inspiration. The Saga of the Volsung was the direct inspiration for Lord of the Rings, yes.
Nice.
The god-given gold, which is not yours, and has a demonic and terrible price to any who are seized in its grasp and curse.
Jumping back to the art just briefly. One, I'm very pleased with how this is turning out.
Oh no, this looks amazing, man.
I've got to finesse the background and fill things out behind the tree. Also, because this was shot in the evening, the tones are much darker. I'm going to have to fiddle and brighten them up to match the hues of the rest of the world. But that darn tree, people at work during my lunch break, they'd see me hunched over my computer clicking away at these little strands. They're like, oh, that's cool, but what are you doing? And they're like, that tree took a lot of time. So I'm pleased to see it. But now it is time to switch gears, because this background, I'm going to make available to all and hope it will be of use to folks. But its first role for me will serve as a background to Jay Ventus's OC, whom folks might remember I had this wing on his back last week, and I felt it just didn't look like flight. It was well-rounded. I think it came close to his character reference sheet in terms of the wing, but it just wasn't saying this character is flying. So, taking more inspiration from our Griffin Vulture, I tried to redraw the wing. And I'm more pleased with the results here. Bliss raised some very good points, but I think that I like this M shape to his figure, while his body creates a V. If I could get a P, he'd be the most valuable player.
Right. No, that does look really good, though. And when it came to your MLP map, or your Ponyville map, believe it or not, when that area looked darker, I didn't think it was nighttime or taken from a nighttime place. I thought it was just in the shadow of the mountain, because there's mountains all over the place. I'm like, oh, it's shadowed by a mountain. That's cool.
It is also apparently right at the edge of the Everfree Forest, which it used to be darker. It's mellowed out.
Yeah, no, if a little filly can just walk right through it like it's no big deal, and the series doesn't even think it's significant enough to show Apple Bloom walk into Zikora's house, you might say I think the fangs have fallen out.
Though I'm noticing that this is the fun thing about revisiting arc you've left alone for just a little bit. I notice how thick his character's calf is in relation to the body. I let Bodycoon, I still think was a fun investment. I think I let Bodycoon influence that a little too much. I gotta thicken this up a little.
Extra thick. Oh.
This is why I love vectors, because you can
Right.
The thickening.
Nice. We got a couple questions. Anne of Dreams, how long do you think a moon is? I would have just gone with lunar cycle, because if we're going to borrow the pseudo-pagan aesthetic of Equestria, uh, in ancient times we did a lot more judging things based on the moon. So I would have gone with that theory as well, although of course we don't know because they never explain it. Um, and someone asked as well, another deep philosophical question, is the pursuit of perfection dangerous? Getting really philosophical here. I suppose we should be wearing togas and standing next to a big Greek pillar, posed in a profound manner. I'll be Plato.
Oh, but I
He's
don't
my
want to
boy.
be Socrates.
So
Sorry,
he had
Bill.
to drink inky medicine and then he died.
Honestly, I read his apology. It's like, I do not doubt why people wanted you to die. This is your idea of apology? I was a college student and didn't really grasp the concept.
Right.
But before we dive into this, what you said about moons might answer an earlier question from Champ to Stay. Have you seen Cutie Mark Laboratories' video on the exchange rate of the bit? And actually, Champ to Stay asked the question about moons too. I have not. I've heard people talk about it in light of my one counterpoint that I saw brought up that I think makes a lot of sense is that to make an exchange rate, you have to make an assumption about certain values. And the funny thing about Equestria is that we make assumptions based on our familiarity, but we might be wildly off base.
Yeah, I do remember I had an interesting confrontation with a fan who, I don't want to call it a confrontation. I get the feeling that this person was trying to communicate. I just think not to be vain, I think they fumbled it a bit. When I was making that video about Aleister Crowley's Aeons applied to MLP, which I would otherwise recharacterize if I did that now, they were trying to argue, oh, well, what if we had them out of order? And that defeats the purpose of it. I know the person was just trying to play devil's advocate, but they just they did it from a position where they clearly had no idea what an Aeon was. So it came off less like they were playing devil's advocate and more announcing that they didn't know. They were trying to say, oh, well, what if they had the Aeon of Horus before Isis? And like that doesn't make any sense. So it's a bit like saying I can do advanced advanced quantum physics, but I don't know what math is. So to speak. But a conclusion I then came to in the when replying to this person was the world of Equestria has to be human enough for the lessons to matter. Because if we go with the saying of anything goes and anything can be interpreted, we need to remember this is a show that's supposed to give it seeks to give some sort of moral or lesson at the end of the series, and if you're gonna make a completely alien world, you're not going to have it filled with relevant morals to today's social circles and concepts of friendship to children, because it's meant to help them in a very loose and general cartoony sense. It's meant to help them make friends here, not make friends in some made-up alien world out there. So it has to be flexible to a point.
For some reason, you're making me think of, I can't remember the specific argument, but C.S. Lewis tackled this sort of anything goes mentality, and again in a video that's been animated here on YouTube. I'm gonna have to search for it again though. I think mostly he was tackling the idea of people saying, well, we believe that Jesus existed, but he wasn't what the Bible claims. He had strong opinions on that, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
And he, as ever, I think he makes very compelling arguments. But I derailed by going back on conversations. We were about to dive into Gosh, sorry, I've been
Perfection. Oh
perfect.
wait,
Yes,
yeah, no, you're good at
no, that's right.
pursuit.
Is perfection destructive?
Well, I mean, this is the semantics part of me because if you want to know how to be a game breaking philosopher, study semantics because then you will find out that 95% of arguments are people just agreeing with each other very terribly.
I like that.
um, because I would study the exact language that people are using in there, because you pick up how nuanced everyone really is. Like everyone that most people would dismiss as like stupid or a simpleton, you study semantics and then you realize how much depth everyone really has, or how much nuance the world has. You also find out listening to arguments that most of the time, a lot of people who think they disagree with each other actually completely agree. They're just really terrible at communicating it, or sometimes aren't even arguing about the same thing. So I suppose, in light of semantics, I should say my definition of perfection is you might say it's the best possible things, but I think a lot of people have fallen under the mistaken belief that perfection means without flaw. Or if you do want to include that, I would argue that my definition is a bit weird. Oh, I dare you to drink holy water. Oh, I already do that. Just for fun. No problem, Mara Cruz. This is actually an interesting question. Because some people say, what does a perfect world look like? And in a strange way, I could get into how I think that in some ways existence is that, or just being can be that. And if you look at it from like a big picture, like a long game big picture, but I'm not going to go into that one. I would have to explain way too much, and this is more casual. But I do think that there can be a concept of the idea of like suffering or so-called flaw in perfection, and that's part of the perfection. So when people say, "Oh, I'd want to go to heaven, but I wouldn't want to because it's boring," but if heaven is defined as a perfect place, then it isn't. Then by definition, you can't be bored to tears of it. Or you would have to assume definitions of perfection to mold it into that. But I do think that there can be an idea of, in a weird way, suffering, striving, struggle, and things we wouldn't define as perfect in perfection, in a sense of perfection. Because there's a certain character element to those things that is, I would argue, vital to one's enjoyment of being. What is a Shakespeare play without an element of tragedy in it, for instance? And it's arguably a lot of the reason why a lot of people like his plays is it hits a moment of catharsis, which it hits a moment of catharsis that is so that I would argue is like really relevant and like strikes deep at the human spirit, that despite you feeling a sense of tragedy, there's something so incredibly beautiful about it that you can argue that maybe for a moment there really was perfection, even throughout the expression of this tragedy, so to speak. Sorry if I sound like I'm looping a bit, but
I mean,
I view the Oh, sorry.
No, finish your thought, please.
Oh yeah, no. But I think that perfection is the one thing. It's kind of like utopia. You'll never achieve it, but that's kind of the point. I would argue that the point of things like perfection or utopia is that you'll never achieve them, but it is to participate in, you might say, as Alan Watts would put it, the game of reality or the game of being, to attempt to pursue that, even knowing that you will never achieve it. Or to quote my favorite story, probably of all time, or classic story, Faust, Gertrude's Faust. It's the thing that wins Faust his salvation, even though he loses the deal with Mephistopheles, which should be a tragedy, is that Faust was always striving for something higher than himself, even though it was something which, even with all the powers of hell and materialism, he would never have been able to ever actually achieve. It's his constant striving toward those higher things that it wins him his salvation in heaven, even though he loses the deal. which is supposed to be something that dooms him. Like, he's supposed to have gone to hell after that. And Mephistopheles is like, remember, if you're so disillusioned with life and existence, if I can get you to explain, to say, remain, O time, thou art so beautiful, like existence being so good that he would want to be frozen in the for the full potential of a moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sounding so pretentious as I say this. I'm so aware of that. But if he can give Faust that, because Faust legitimately doesn't think he can do that, then he wins. But because Faust always aimed higher than himself, he was never going to go to hell to begin with. He's given all the women he could ask for, and yet he just wants to settle down and have a romantic relationship with one, although it ends in tragedy. He's given power, but rather than abuse it, he just fixes the problems that he had with his town and then hands off the power to someone else. And he does do some darker things in the middle. Human ego is still relevant, but the idea was he was always aiming higher than himself, even though he could never have it, even though tragedy always struck. The striving was so beautiful that it was the thing that redeems him.
I know that there are many representations of Faust. If people wanted to see like a movie or play adaptation, do you have a recommendation?
I know this is a written one, but if you can find it by Goethe, he probably had the best interpretation of Faust as far as I was concerned. Where he's not a crotchety materialist, he's in many ways a disillusioned man who doesn't see any meaning in anything and is quite disappointed with life. His motivations are very human. And Goethe himself wrote it as almost a model how to live the ideal life. And it was, in order to live the best life, you often have to flirt with things that are dangerous. Although my home state of New Hampshire wrote its own, in a weird way, propaganda by making its own Faust myth called The Devil and Daniel Webster. I thought it was charming, personally, and it has quite a few of the same story beats and themes, although the original German play has a lot more depth and time put into it.
How Devil and Daniel Webster?
Yeah, it's basically New Hampshire propaganda where a New Hampshire man sells his soul to the devil, and Danny Webster is kind of a local political hero from the 1800s. And we really love him because he's a New Hampshire man. And a lot of New England folklore is in it, like how the name Mr. Scratch came from it was the very New England way of referring to the devil.
Huh.
And that's his name in the play too.
Oh yes, I think I've heard a separate story of a man who makes a deal with the devil, and you could tell how much he sinned by how loudly he prayed in church that weekend. And he referred to the devil as Old Scratch. But I'm grasping a bit at straws on this one. I'll have to look this up. You're giving me a lot to view and take in, Ann. This is why I love talking with you.
Oh, no, I love talking with you, too, because I don't have too many people I can talk about this stuff with. Connor Carl Tepe, Aeon is a demon with angel wings. You know, it's really funny you mentioned that because that metaphor is relevant, but I do always applaud people who pick up on things like that because you might say, despite borrowing demonic Christian symbolism, Aeon is not you might say he's more of a Thelemite character than a Christian character.
So don't go thumping the Bible right now. It's more than you think.
Yeah, it's where Thelema was a religion by Aleister Crowley, where one of the things of note that it claimed was because it imbued a lot of like Zen and Eastern philosophy, and so one of the things it notices in a ritual that I always thought was really weird was after you summon your angel, which is essentially it's an omnipotent version of yourself. It's yourself as God, or Ankh-Fen Khonsu, myself made perfect. And the first thing he'll command you to do is you must summon the 4 demonic kings of hell that rule the earth. And the idea is that they're all corruptions of former systems of enlightenment that came before Thelema that somehow, in some way, got corrupted. And you must confront them, and then you must confront all of them with the angel's presence. And so what we actually learn from Thelema is there is no. It turns out none of the spirits and the demons and anything of that, none of them were actually agents of damnation. They were all agents of your salvation all along, kind of like how Mephistopheles leads to Faust's salvation through his constant striving. In this sense, even demons are agents of your salvation because in listening to whatever wisdom the demon has to teach you or whatever trial it presents, you are brought ever closer to salvation. So they're just essentially darker than angels about that, but the original Satan was never actually an evil figure. He was always part of the cosmic and divine plan. And to see Satan was to essentially have you confront one of his problems, because there was an old Jewish story, very old, where a man who hated Satan says, this accursed and damn thing, if I were the one in charge, I would have an arrow to the eye of Satan. And then Satan, of course, hears this because he is the angel that walks upon the earth and among men. And so he disguises himself as a house guest, and accustomed to those laws back then. He invites him in for dinner. And then suddenly the house guest is projecting all these horrifying images of having died, and people outside, who are really just Satan projecting the voices, are saying, "Oh, look at that, your house guest, he has perished in your house." And when he comes outside, when the man runs outside a bit afraid and terrified, he is confronted by the angel of Satan, and he says, what have I done so wrong? He says, you have wished harm and death unto another one of the ilk of God's creation. And he says, what should I have thought, or what should I have said? And Satan, without even having to ponder, said, you should never, as opposed to wishing an arrow to the eyes of your enemies, should you not wish he had the clearest sight to see what was wrong to begin with, that he might achieve his salvation through his own discovery?
Huh. That's deep. I mean, can I offer some modern day stories that may touch on a similar vein?
Oh, sure, of course.
Funny enough, wishing ill on a foe is actually something that happened with the stop motion My Little Pony that aired on YouTube today. There is a race, and Rainbow, in a reenactment of the tortoise and the hare, basically, is napping because she thinks she's so far ahead. And Twilight passes her, and she starts to get very full of herself. Haha, I've going to beat Rainbow Dash at her own game. And she is so proud that she doesn't recognize Fluttershy is coming up behind her. And so in trying to give an aha gotcha, she's actually fallen victim to her own pride.
Yeah. Or, actually, funny enough, I can bring up another good example of this. Is there are moments where in Faust where Faust is either angry, incensed, or driven to action, and yet Mephistopheles, as opposed to showing sympathy and advice, begins to laugh at him. Or like he has this really sinister smile, and it's a mocking smile. And the smile is actually a warning. The smile says, and the smile is that you've given one of Mephistopheles' pitfalls is that he can teach you a lot of wisdom, but you can fall. But it's a wisdom that you might be too arrogant to fully receive. So when he receives all this wisdom, he gets consumed by it and he becomes proud. But his pride obviously gets in the way of the wisdom, so it causes issues for him. So when Mephistopheles sees people fall into this pitfall, he does not give you a look of sympathy. He sees that you're causing your own error, or you've gotten in the way of an otherwise perfect wisdom. So whatever problem you have is your own fault, even though you're so smug about yourself that you still think you're doing it right. And so all you get in return is a very dark and sinister smile.
Ooh. So pay attention when that smile comes up. Uh, One other example to what you're talking about. I forget, Aeon, are you a fan of Warhammer 40K?
Funny enough, me and the editor just did a collab on that. I've been meaning to get into it. He pulled me in because he was reviewing something called Astarte, and
Uh,
he needed me to explain what. I suppose I won't go any further than that, but I do appear later in that video.
ooh, is that out now, or is it in the work?
Uh, I believe it is in the work, but it will be coming out soon on the editor's channel.
Excellent. Well, funny enough, I have not played and haven't really read many of the books, but the Emperor had a text-to-speech device. It's a very popular representation and something of a gateway into the fandom. And in it, one of the Emperor of Mankind's sons, Magnus the Red, he is arguing with his father about the four gods of chaos, and that while they have many of vice, they also represent very real and positive aspects of mankind.
I saw this, yes.
Case in point, Korn, a chaos god normally associated with violence, is also intensely honor-bound. He will not backstab you to achieve his ends. He's going to fight you head on, and he might decorate his throne with your skull, but that's because he thought you were worth fighting.
Hmm.
And so it actually offered a very deep look into these gods of chaos, which are not, they even say in the video, these are not Saturday morning cartoon villains you can just up and defeat. They're a part of us.
Yeah, or similarly, there are alternate versions of. Not to keep going back to this, there are also alternate versions of the Faust story with Mephistopheles, including, like, if Goethe is the enlightened Faust, then Malraux is the unenlightened Faust. And in the unenlightened Faust, you can't fight Mephistopheles because, like, this romantic idea of, oh, the devil gave me powers, but I turned around and defeated him with it. That never works in old poetry.
So Spawn and
Because
Ghost Rider are a no-go.
Yeah, because the devil's always smart. Because the devil is a metaphor a lot of the time, or in a spiritual sense, your own lesser ego. If you're trying to use it to defeat the devil, you aren't defeating him, because that is the devil. It's the very same ego that you would have tried to fight your way to freedom with. So in that sense, the devil has already won before you even thought about rebelling, and he's already very aware of it.
And there's that smile.
And there's the smile.
Going full circle back to Shyamalan and Devil, because we mentioned the Nostalgia Critics review. I confess I haven't seen the movie, but would you say that movie taps into the idea of the devil as being your ego, or does it drop the ball in certain cases?
I would need to see it again. I can appreciate that it at least attempts that. But you can. I have this. I suppose the ego is more like in general it's probably like a neutral thing, because again everything being an agent of salvation, I suppose. Nowadays, although be careful, some are some are way more dangerous than others. I suppose a lot of people would probably still be a lot safer talking to angels than not. But some people find it better to just talk to demons, I suppose. But trying to defeat something with itself, I noticed, doesn't really work, and that's why in many cases there's always that story about how you'll never win against the devil, at least not with your ego. And same thing with Faust, you can never defeat him with his ego. He only wins because he transcends the deal and aimed higher. and even then, he doesn't defeat him in a fight. Just when Mephistopheles claims his soul or tries to, three angels step in his way and say he's not, by the proof of his life and strength of character and always aiming higher. He is not yours, or he is not of your ilk. There's another interesting thing of concept of the devil being your ego, and that's even the devil himself is a very complicated character. I told you the story about how he's actually in old times was an agent of salvation before that got turned into just a villain. But even when not, many people are quick to point out, especially in occult communities, that even if he is the challenging adversary, constantly wary about the flaws in existence, he's also the first divine figure to advocate on behalf of of the sympathies of humanity. And not always necessarily for an evil reason. He might just say, this is an unfair condition amongst reality. And then he challenges, in many Christian and Jewish stories, it is a challenge amongst the Most High to answer the very human question of, with a problem like this, how is existence worth it? And they set out to answer the question.
Would you say
in a lot of these,
is Job an example of this? He's probably a very classic figure of Satan arguing for unfairness.
I would argue yes, because one of the biggest things would be because it is like probably one of the most interesting stories of the Bible of if your life really be this miserable, then why have these beliefs, or is this man really only on your side because of that? And I suppose I would interpret that as, this is a very initiate way of interpreting it. It's what is it? Does he only worship the superficial image of God because his life happens to be going well, or does he believe in the deeper exoteric message where it for the most part acknowledges that life can be suffering, but my inner Viktor Frankl kicks in, and for those of you who don't know, he was obsessed with the idea that the goal of life is not to be happy. The goal of life is to have meaning, because even meaningful suffering is infinitely better than meaningless happiness. Which I know which might sound alien to a lot of people. I've picked it up through certain life experiences, not to flex or anything. But if you believe in that deeper esoteric meaning where you can still have the suffering of life, but still see the beauty of the world, maybe even because there is suffering, because in a weird way, it's the closest way I know I'm describing something I can't really describe all that well if one hasn't had the experience, and not to sound pretentious. But there's something almost poetically beautiful to it, even when you reflect on your own life from that perspective. And Frankl himself demonstrated the philosophy because he was locked in a concentration camp, and so if there was ever a time to test that philosophy, because he said this should still work even when everything seems hopeless, and he tested it there, and it not only worked, he went on to be a very, very successful psychologist. He developed something called logotherapy. Shout out to Like Stories of Old. If you want to see that in a video, he makes an amazing video about the movie The Gray, talking about it as a big metaphor for Frankl.
I watched that video, and you're right.
Yeah,
Aeon is the one who clued me into this channel. So, yes, and so I've seen that one, and it is powerful. They keep living just to live. That even when there's no reason to keep going, they do.
Yeah, and that movie, like if you see it in the movie, it essentially expands on that incredibly well. Something that he doesn't show in the video, but still reinforces the point is when after the plane crashes, they're saying, "Hey, wait, get their wallets." And the point of getting their wallets wasn't to loot them, because he actually attacks or shouts at one of the other guys for trying to loot. he gets the wallets so that they can collect the IDs, so that if they can ever get back to society, then they know who was on the plane. And before he's confronted at the end, with the last good fight he'll ever know, he actually is, in a very powerful scene, flipping through the wallets and looking at everyone's ID before he realizes where he is, of course.
Yet another movie I must now check out. See, this is the thing of all these wonderful discussions. I end up with a very long to-do list.
Oh, of course. I have a long list too, I admit.
But yeah, like Stories of Old is a fantastic channel that I could not I cannot endorse more readily.
Yes, he is one of the few analyst channels or analyst review sorts of channels like what we do, but he can somehow strike deeply at your emotions in a very thought-provoking way.
I'm still floored
which is very hard to do.
I'm still floored that he could get me to reinterpret the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies.
Oh yeah, no, he is a masterclass man who gets storytelling really well. Because I remember there were a few nights where me and Bliss would we'll sometimes sit on the couch and watch TV, or rather YouTube on TV together, and we would sometimes have these like immensely deep and very personal discussions based on a video. So like we had deep discussions about The Gray. When he talked about Ricky Gervais's Afterlife, we had a really deep discussion about that. Even though it's not really relevant to my life, it still hits you emotionally. When he talked about the hero's departure with Solid Snake and Logan from Wolverine. Because I learned something about archetypes through that, is that apparently the Great Father can indeed turn into the victorious hero once again, but the cost is he dies in the process.
Like Beowulf.
Yeah, he's allowed his one last hurrah, but that last hurrah comes at a price because he is old, and it is a world that seemingly isn't his, but that whatever problem he's facing, it is always like a remnant of his old world trying to creep its way into the next generation. So he is allowed to be the hero one more time because it's still fundamentally his problem, and it shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be there to exist for, his children and his heirs, for his children and heirs to deal with, because, that was his generation's problem, and that it should die with him. So for him to face the afterlife, face the gods or God with true honor and glory, he needs to ensure that, and I say this with air quotes, that the evils of his old generation have died with him. So he must go. So even though it will kill him, he must go out and fight the dragon.
It's funny that reminds me of. Well, I wouldn't call this done well, but it's in line with what you're talking about. Netflix has 3 Godzilla anime movies, and without, I don't want to give a lot away, but a big part of the end involves supposedly taking all the hatred of the old era and facing Godzilla to destroy it. But there's a great many things that, the so-called hero is not living up to being a caring father in that case. So I'm like, no, I see what you were going for, but I think you got it wrong. So even when we touch, I guess it's like, even if we touch on the archetypal knowledge, it could still be misrepresented or done poorly.
Oh, for sure. Like when I talk about a lot of this stuff, or like even with MLP, it's like I'll talk about a deep theme, archetypal theme, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm analyzing Shakespeare, so to speak. That doesn't mean I think MLP is bad or anything like that, but I'm also acknowledging that, like, you're not going to get Macbeth levels or Tempest levels of deep literary scholarly study. It's just I'm just using it as a way to talk about like a a deep thing. And Lightning Bliss, am I a Godzilla fan? I've seen a couple Godzilla movies. I wouldn't call myself a kaiju aficionado, kaiju movie aficionado. Like the most I've ever really gotten into it was Pacific Rim. But I did see the new Godzilla with Lightning Bliss, and a she has a review of it coming out real soon if it's not already out.
Excellent.
With Fiora and Midnight Sonata, Dual Snare's wife. But yeah, you can tap into a archetypal story and maybe not have it be executed the most properly for sure. Which is, sometimes that's really sad because sometimes you can really see what they were trying to do, and maybe after you do that, maybe you would have wanted it to succeed, but then it's just like, but this, and that. Oof.
You tried, and I honor that, but it didn't work out. So
Yeah.
But if you can study what didn't work, then maybe someone can learn from that and try again. Might not even be the.
Oh yes.
Might not. Here's the thing. When people talk about reviewers, there is sometimes this concern I have that people think that we can somehow dictate to the show producers or the creatives behind the program, that we're somehow telling them, do this with this character. If I'm going pie in the sky, I'm hoping that some young fan who watches my videos an idea will click, and then later on, when they are in a position to write, that will serve them, even if it's just like 1% of everything I say, if they still remember just that 1%. That means more than if I have this illusionary power over the creative staff.
I think that when people see, like, if there's like, if you make a really well articulated point, like if you make a really, really well articulated point, some people will think, oh, this must be a message of truth. And it can sometimes come off if everything seems to fit, and then they see what you were getting at. I like to encourage other people to make their own points, or to look at this stuff. Like I literally just watch like analysts. Sometimes I'll just watch like stories of old, or read something about archetypes just because I want my own perspective on that. Like it sort of gets confusing that, and this isn't going to go anywhere controversial, but just an example. When people ask me what is your religion or spirituality, I'll say, well, I don't really have a religion, and if you want to call my spirituality anything, I maybe call it Aeonism. There isn't a name for it because I read literally everything, and I try to read everything that had a grasp on me because I get the feeling that my intuition liked it for a reason, and then I compile it into something where I'm like, okay, what's common between, I don't know, Odinism and Zen Buddhism and Lutheranism and all these other things that touched me in my childhood, because you remember moments in your life where you get a grasp or an inkling of something, and then you're just like, okay, that meant something. There was truth somewhere in there, even if I can't articulate it. So you're seeking that because you know you've seen it before. And I'm just like, I would love everyone else to do that too. Not because not out of any command, but just because it is actually a really interesting little journey you can go on your own for. And it's intimately and personally yours, so to speak. And then when you gain perspectives like that, then I suppose other people will seem to think that you're such an authority that your voice has a sense of dictation to it. Or I don't know, maybe I'm just reading too much into it.
I think we're drawn to the articulate. I think sometimes the articulate is a deception. You know, it sounds great when you first
semantics, yeah.
It sounds great when you first hear it, but then you think about it, it's like, wait, no, that was a load of baloney. And
that's that.
Or there's that song. You talk with someone and everything sounds right in the moment, but you give it a few days and you're like, wait, no, I don't agree with that. That happens. In fact, I think it should happen.
or there's times where you encounter something that you don't know how to exactly articulate or have yet, or know how to interpret yet. You just know you've experienced something, and that something might be something completely ineffable. There may never be a description for it, or no way to convey it to someone who never had it. Like I've had this is one of my own pitfalls, because I'm a very, you might say, I'm a very Odinic person. So one of the superficial pitfalls is you're missing an eye. You might miss something in front of you. And that is, a lot of my personal experiences are based on things I can't communicate to people who haven't had the experience. Like for instance, I don't mind talking about this because it's not really like a deeply emotional thing for me, as I put it. But I did actually die once, and then I came back. And some people will ask me like, "Hey, what's that like?" And it's so hard to convey that, because like there's no comparison that I could give you within life that can convey this. Like there is a way, and that's based on the other ineffable thing, and that's I'm what you would call a psychonaut. So I experiment with altered consciousness, psychedelics, and I do it for like spiritual or medicine reasons. And most people think that you only do that like for hedonism, like, oh, you're doing this just for some petty hedonism to feel good, and that's really never the case. It's, in a weird way, it's a deeply spiritual confrontation with yourself that can tell you better than anyone else could, like what's up, and even fix a few things. But in that comparison, it's like I can't convey to you what it's like to. I can't convey to you what it's like if it's like non-controversial one, like mescaline, for instance. I did that because I've admitted to it. It's like, well, I feel like I'm, as Alan Watts put it, a stranger to the world. I was horribly depressed. And then I said, and I was mimicking a shamanic ceremony, and I said, can you do something about it? And in a weird way, I had sort of an archetypal vision out of it, but it's also something that even if I told you intellectually what was going on, it doesn't convey the weight of the experience. It also doesn't help that I have to ascribe words to the experience, because when I was communicating with what me and some of my friends called the one true being, or the sun god, you're speaking in a language that doesn't use words, and pretty much everything you say has like 12 manifold meanings that all apply to your life or your experience of being, and it means all 12 things or all 100 things or all infinite things sometimes at the same time, and you just simultaneously grasp all of it. But I can't convey that. I can't really convey the exact experience of that in words either. So it's this thing of like, okay, this had a massive impact on my life, but the thing that's almost frustrating is like, unless you've had the experience, I can't even really convey it to someone. So there was a time I was hunting around. I even asked Dr. Wolf about this because he made a video. I was like, hey, so you had a near-death experience. He made a video about this on his Good to Be Helping series. And I was kind of wondering if he had like what I'd call a breakthrough where you get to see the other side, so to speak. Because I've only met one other person, and she said the most weird. She asked me a weird question that I've been thinking about for years about it. So I was half hoping that with Dr. Wolf for a second, but I don't. It just didn't seem from his video that he had a breakthrough, so I don't know.
Well, people process things in different ways. I'm afraid that's the greatest insight I can offer on this. Because
right.
I have not shared this experience, so I can't even imagine what it was like.
I usually tell people without arousing any controversy, my usual response to some people who are worried about death is, funny enough, I just say, don't worry about it. Because it's, the only thing I can say that isn't really weird about it is that it's a lot, in a way that you probably wouldn't expect. It's a lot better than you think it is, or it's not horrifying.
Well, I often default to Discworld of all things, as its personification of death says, "Look, you're afraid of pain and fear. I'm here to take that away. I'm not doing this because I want to hurt you." So I actually think on that, and I take some comfort from it. But I'm in no hurry to for that next phase.
Right. Like there's also the sense that it alters your psychology to be there, because something I've noticed that when a lot of us come back, and by us I mean those of us who've had this, you get a weird and sudden appreciation for life, and your oddly enough your fear of death in the people who've had this is greatly reduced. They're not in any hurry to get back there. They kind of tell you a lot of stuff about that, but it's also like I saw a lot of Alan Wattsy like things and other such iconography. Even when I was I was influenced heavily by that one healing trip I did on the mescaline at one point, because not advocating anything illegal, by the way, for educational reasons only. I was talking to an entity, and I asked it who it was, because it gave me a form, and it gave me a form to work with. And oddly enough, in its mental space, we were as our OCs, and I said, "Why is this?" And he says, "Oh, personal identity. You see yourself as that. You identify more with this figure than any other. It is technically a part of you, and I suppose we can talk about that later, but I've got other things to do with you right now." I'm like, "Okay, well, you're a voice. What do you look like?" He's like, "Oh, yes, I look like, for our conversation, I shall look like this." And he implanted this image of this cute little alicorn figure, but we have the. But I thought that was interesting that it will have you appear in the form that you most self-identify with, not necessarily what you seem to look like. But what did it ask me? Oh yeah, when we had a conversation, the idea of Satan as ego popped up. And we were in this amalgamation of what I would have considered to be a living room, and I was in the demonic appearance when we talked about this. And I was about to ask him what his name was, because he hadn't really introduced himself to me yet, not with a name. And suddenly playing on the recording is a Canadian-American philosopher called Manly P. Hall, and he was describing what Satan saw when he entered the throne room of God. And he says, "And so Satan entered the dark room, and all he saw before, and what he saw before him was an infinite void that appeared as nothingness." And he says, where is he, the highest of God, greatest of gods, highest and the most high? And though he strained to hear it, he thought he heard the voice of a meek and small child say, answer him back. And then me and the entity slowly turned to look at each other. And what continued on the record player was Satan saying, almost in disbelief, "Do you mean to tell me that the meek voice I hear ever in the distance of this vast eternity is really the voice of..." And now the sentence would usually finish with the term God, but it stopped at that point, and we're just kind of staring at each other, and I'm realizing what the demonic appearance metaphor was. So I'm like, okay, if this is me right now, what is that to say about this? Because at least in the old stories, this is about the point where the meek voice becomes the booming and terrifying form of the Archangel Michael, here to dish out divine justice, so to speak. But that isn't what happened here. We just kind of stared at each other for a long time, and then he booped me on the muzzle.
I like the idea of divine powers enjoying a little boop.
Oh yeah, no, he literally said boop too. We both started giggling about it after. But he never actually gave me a name. It was just kind of an understanding that I know what this is. Like, I know what this is. I know who this is, and I don't need it. And it was more powerful that it wasn't told to me directly. That expression. But he also said, because he said you felt like a stranger to the world. step closer, and then we were in this chamber of immaculate light. And I tried briefly to get a lock on what this was using, and also Drazix, I'll answer that question in a moment. And he said, you might not want to do that. And then I tried to get a reading. It was something that was impossibly larger than the universe. I didn't actually get a full grasp on it, but it is common that when you encounter this figure, whenever anyone tries to see its true form, it becomes increasingly Lovecraftian before you pass out, and it kind of resets your brain to make it like something like a daydream. And after making it, he essentially turned my brain snapping into a daydream, and I looked back at him and he said, I think you get the idea. You might not want to do that again, though. So suddenly the rays of the sun came out in real life, and when you hit it, you have this weird mental reaction. So I suddenly started saying everything I thought was wrong about myself to it, almost as though I felt compelled, like I had to apologize. Some would say, well, is that a confession? And it's like, well, no. Because if we're going to go with the idea of the ego as the devil, there are people when they've had a negative experience of the afterlife, they immediately left when they realized, wait a minute, the devil was really me, and the hell I'm in is something I put myself in because I'm judging myself. Or this is everything I never forgave myself for. And he was insisting that I stop apologizing for things. Then apparently my arm exploded, and he said, yeah, no, that's self-harm. You got to stop doing it. It's really self-destructive. But when he reassembled me, I didn't have depression. He reassembled me without the depression. And I said, well, wait a minute. If you're this big Lovecraftian thing, then what do you have any business doing, talking to anything like me or dealing with anything on the world? You're bigger than the universe. Well, shouldn't this all be completely irrelevant to you? And apparently I got this really big discovery where apparently fragments of itself were in literally everything, including making up the souls of the sum total of all life in the universe, including myself. And he says, remember, you're playing a game. Do you think I would make a game in which I would project myself? And then it ended with me staring at myself in a mirror. And the mirror broke before we carried on.
Hey, that is a lot to take in.
Yeah, my depression was gone after that. That was nice.
At the same time, I feel we should emphasize that we're not advocating.
I don't advocate anyone doing anything.
Yeah, this is something unique to Aeon and his experiences. It's not a how-to guide. Don't get the ideas that we're endorsing any course of action. Mostly, it's just Aeon sharing his stories, which are fascinating. Well, stories is the wrong word. Experiences.
Yeah, and I would even say for safety, it's like, don't do it unless you... if we have the attitude in the Psychonaut community of, if you're going to do it and no one's going to stop you, then that's fate, so to speak. But otherwise, we would advocate that you not do it. And that's not to be like a gatekeeper buzzkill or anything. It's just you shouldn't do this lightly. I only did it because I didn't want depression anymore. So, and I didn't want to. And it seemed like the stuff I tried didn't work. But I had reached a point where it's like I would have done anything. And I'm not saying that that's healthy, and I'm also not saying that therefore justifies it. But I was in a place where I was like looking to try anything, and I did get a deep experience out of it. But that doesn't mean that you'll get that experience if you do it. So just be warned. Mm-hmm. The way we word it as, you see whatever you need to see, and whatever you need to see probably isn't what I needed to see. So, Psychonaut beware.
And talking with you makes time fly. I mean, before every stream I've done, I'd be like, wow, can I really hold the discussion for 2 hours? And I've been very lucky that you, Lightning Bliss, the Full Papers, Dusty, all all these wonderful Maddie, all these wonderful folks make it easy. And this has been especially fascinating to hear your thoughts this evening.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, I'm seeing it is 9 o'clock, so it's about that time.
It's about that time. But let's first off, just a little art review. I'm feeling pretty pleased with how Jay's OC is turning out. I finally added the tail, which is honestly, I sometimes wish humans had tails so we could better read our emotional states and moods. But the wings worked out well. I'm pleased with the overall design, and Ponyville is nearing completion. I'm confident that I can wrap this up this weekend. I mean, all that's really left is little extra homes in Hillside, and then Canterlot in the distance.
Yeah, no, it is a really, really good art piece, for sure. Even if I do think that it does look cool that you have it darker in the foreground, just because it gives I'm not an artist, so don't take my advice. I'm not a professional at this, beyond an amateur, but I do like that it provides some kind of contrasting distance to me, because it just looks like, oh, I am atop the mountain staring down upon the in this little valley of Ponyville, and it's shady because I don't know the mountain is behind me, but I'm also not gonna, if this is especially a commission, you really shouldn't take my advice. I'm just giving an opinion.
Well, truthfully, Jay's request was his OC flying over Ponyville. It's like, I need a high-angle view of Ponyville. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to draw the whole blessed thing, because this can be used for so much, and that would be good. But the nice thing is that through the power of Illustrator, I can duplicate this layer, and so I could brighten one and leave this one, another layer as you see it. So it's not an all or nothing. I can do both and see how they look, see how they contrast.
Mm-hmm.
So before we go, want to answer a few questions, but also, Aeon, in addition to the video you're going to be talking, where you're talking about with the editor, what are there any projects you'd like to alert everyone?
I do have a few. I might. I do have some stuff with Lightning Blitz that is coming out soon. As a small teaser, a familiar fan favorite is actually reappearing in that video when it's released. If anyone missed Euphoria, fear not. And I was going to make a couple of the videos. One was what happened to me in December. I might do a video about that. And I also might do a video about how, like I said, I might do this, a video about how I view Nightmare Moon as the Great Mother, specifically because of one point in her story about, I'm not going to go too deep into detail about this, the rebellious mother trying to rebel is pacified by the hero is actually part of the mother's backstory. So Nightmare Moon becoming Luna again from the hero is Horus turning Isis into Hathor.
Well, that I definitely want to hear more about, but don't want to spoil the video either.
Yeah. No, I would spoil the video if I went into a long lecture about it.
Well, then we'll look forward to the video. In answer to a question that's been coming up, if Firebrand would talk with me about Surf and or Turf, we do have Taking Two Seriously in the works, but it is not for Surf and or Turf. I don't want to spoil it. Also, I can't set a deadline. It'll be ready when it's ready. And I don't mean that as a dismiss or hostility. Just, it's how we operate. You plug away as best you can and get it done as quick as you can, but you also want to do a good job. For my part, Pony Life finally begins next weekend. And I'm curious to see where it will go. I would love to post a video expressing my thoughts. It's me. We know how that rolls. I usually take forever because I get so swept up in thinking about things. But I will do my utmost and to share my thoughts. And it'll just be interesting to see how fans react to this. We've had oodles of speculation. Now it's time to actually see application.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but once again, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to hear us out. I've been fascinated by our discussion and all the ideas, and now I have an even longer to view list, including finding. I have a hard time reading play scripts, which is why I ask if there's a really good representation of Faust. But a good reread would help.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 200 years. You can find the PDF on Google.
Yeah, there we go. But
that copyright's pretty safely expired.
Excellent. Misty asking if we'll be around for Gen 5 of MLP. I don't plan on calling it quits anytime soon. I'd love to expand, but I never want to just say, oh, I'm done with MLP. I've moved beyond.
Harumph, I say.
Harumph indeed.
Harumph, I say.
So I'm looking forward to whatever the franchise produces, and we'll see what forms it takes and what can be discussed. I'm sorry we couldn't answer everyone's questions, but a really fascinating discussion. It leaves you hungry for more. So in this case, I want to wish you all a wonderful weekend. Just stay as safe as you can. Stand up for what you believe in. Is that something I always hope people will take to heart? And 2020 is a year filled with challenges, but we will get to the other side. I don't know what that other side will be, but we're going to reach it together. So Aeon, thank you for joining us. Thank you for talking with us. And we'll look forward to your future endeavors.
Yes, and I look forward to yours. Thank you for having me.
All right. And to everyone, thanks again. Have a wonderful night. I'm Silver-Quill. Thanks for watching.